I'm Dr. Ellen Langer, and for decades my work at Harvard has focused on a simple but often overlooked idea. The way we think shapes the way we live. We tend to accept age as something that happens to us, an unavoidable biological decline written into our cells. Yet when we look carefully at human behavior, health, and performance, we begin to see that aging is not just a matter of years passing. It is also a psychological process, deeply influenced by how we perceive ourselves and the world around us. When we assume that growing older automatically means becoming weaker, slower, or less capable, we often behave in ways that make those assumptions come true. We move less, expect less from ourselves, and gradually shrink our lives to fit the stereotypes of aging. My research has consistently shown that these expectations are not neutral. They actively participate in shaping our physical health, our cognitive abilities, and our sense of vitality. In studies conducted over many years, we've seen that when people are placed in environments that encourage them to think and act as if they are younger, measurable changes occur. Strength improves, flexibility increases, memory sharpens. These are not miracles and they are not tricks. They are reminders that the mind and body are not separate systems operating independently. They are in constant conversation, and our thoughts are a powerful part of that dialogue. What this tells us is not that biology is irrelevant, but that it is more flexible than we've been taught to believe. When we live mindfully, when we notice new things, remain engaged, and stay open to possibility, we activate processes that support health and resilience. Mindlessness, on the other hand, locks us into rigid categories: young versus old, capable versus incapable. Mindfulness keeps us psychologically young by keeping us mentally alive. Age, in this sense, becomes less about the number of years we've lived and more about how we are living those years. When people stop defining themselves by limitations and start defining themselves by engagement, they often experience changes that conventional wisdom says should not be possible. Energy returns, confidence grows. Even physical markers associated with aging can shift in positive ways. Age is often treated as a fixed biological fact, but in reality, it functions far more like a psychological lens through which we interpret our abilities, our energy, and our potential. From early childhood, we are taught what different ages are supposed to look like, how young people should behave, what middle age means, and what older age supposedly takes away. Over time, these messages become internalized. We don't just hear them, we live them. And the moment we start believing that age defines our limits, our bodies begin to follow those beliefs with remarkable obedience. Consider how often people say, "I'm too old for that," without testing whether it's actually true. That single sentence quietly instructs the body to withdraw, to conserve, to slow down. The muscles respond with less effort, the brain with less curiosity, and motivation fades not because it must, but because it has been told to. What feels like biological decline is often psychological permission to decline. The mind sets the boundary, and the body respects it. Research in psychology has repeatedly shown that expectations shape outcomes. When people expect weakness, they unconsciously move in ways that produce weakness. When they expect forgetfulness, they pay less attention and memory suffers. But when those expectations are challenged, when individuals are placed in situations where they see themselves as capable, active, and engaged, their performance changes. Strength improves, coordination sharpens, cognitive flexibility increases. These changes happen not because the calendar has been altered, but because the mindset has. This is where age reveals itself not as a number, but as a story we tell ourselves. And like any story, it can be rewritten. The moment someone begins to see age as information rather than instruction, something shifts. Instead of asking, "What can I no longer do?" the question becomes, "What can I do now, differently, or better?" That shift alone reactivates engagement. It invites movement, experimentation, and attention, all of which are deeply connected to physical and mental health. One of the most striking aspects of this process is how quickly the body responds. People often assume that change requires years of effort, Yet mindset-driven changes can begin almost immediately. When individuals stop monitoring themselves through the lens of decline and start acting from a place of capability, posture changes, breathing deepens, and energy rises. These are not imagined effects. They are observable, measurable responses to altered perception. The danger of age-based thinking is not aging itself, but passivity. When people believe that time is the primary force acting upon them, they surrender responsibility for how they feel. But when they recognize that their interpretations matter, they regain agency. This doesn't mean denying physical reality or pretending limits don't exist. It means understanding that limits are often broader, more flexible, and more responsive than we assume. The most empowering realization is that the mind does not wait for the body to change before it acts. It acts first. It sets expectations, directs attention, and influences behavior. And behavior, repeated daily, shapes the body over time. When people see themselves as active participants in their own aging process rather than passive recipients of it, they tend to live with more confidence, curiosity, and resilience. Age, then, becomes less of a countdown and more of a context. It informs experience without defining capacity, and when the mind stops treating age as a verdict, the body often responds with a level of vitality that surprises even the person living in it. The question is no longer how old you are, but how strongly you believe that age is in charge. Staying young is often misunderstood as holding on to the past, but psychological research suggests the opposite is true. Youthfulness is not preserved by clinging to what is familiar, but by remaining mentally alive to what is new. Awareness, active, intentional awareness, is the engine that keeps the mind flexible, responsive, and engaged with life. When awareness fades, aging accelerates, not because time suddenly speeds up, but because attention slows down. Much of daily life is lived on autopilot. We wake up, move through routines, and make decisions without truly noticing what we are doing. This mindless state is efficient, but it comes at a cost. When the mind stops noticing, it stops learning. And when learning stops, the brain begins to behave as if its most productive years are already behind it. The body follows this signal with reduced energy and reduced adaptability. Awareness interrupts this process. The simple act of noticing something new, however small, forces the brain to wake up. It demands engagement. Neural pathways that were dormant become active again. This is not abstract theory. It is grounded in how the brain functions. Novelty requires effort, and effort signals relevance. When the mind believes something matters, it mobilizes resources to meet it. People who remain psychologically young tend to share one trait: curiosity. They ask questions, explore alternatives, and resist the urge to categorize experiences too quickly. Instead of saying, "I already know this," they approach situations as if there is always something more to learn. This mindset keeps perception sharp and reactions fluid. Over time, it creates a feedback loop in which engagement fuels vitality, and vitality fuels further engagement. The illusion of aging often comes from repetition without reflection. Doing the same things in the same way convinces the mind that nothing new is possible. The world feels smaller, slower, and less interesting. In contrast, mindful awareness expands experience. A familiar walk becomes different when attention is directed to changes in light, sound, or movement. A routine conversation becomes stimulating when one listens for nuance instead of waiting to respond. These subtle shifts in attention accumulate, reinforcing the brain's capacity to adapt. What is particularly powerful is that awareness does not require dramatic life changes. It does not demand new careers, extreme habits, or constant stimulation. It requires presence. When people become more present, they stop measuring themselves against fixed expectations of age. They are too engaged with what they are doing to worry about what they are supposed to be able to do. In that state, performance often improves naturally. There is also an emotional dimension to awareness that directly affects aging. When people are attentive, they experience more control. They are less likely to feel helpless or resigned. That sense of agency reduces stress, and reduced stress has profound implications for health. Chronic stress accelerates aging processes. Mindful engagement counteracts them by shifting the body out of constant defensive mode. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of awareness is how it reframes time itself. When attention is fully engaged, time feels expansive rather than limiting. Moments feel richer, days feel fuller. This subjective experience of time influences how people evaluate their own age. Someone who feels engaged often feels younger, regardless of the number on their birth certificate. That feeling, in turn, affects posture, movement, decision-making, and social interaction. Awareness keeps the mind in motion, and a mind in motion does not age in the same way as a mind that has settled into certainty. The more we notice, the more alive we become. The more alive we become, the less power age has to define us. One of the most limiting beliefs about aging is the idea that it is something that simply happens to us, independent of our choices, our behaviors, and our mindset. This belief quietly removes personal responsibility and replaces it with resignation. When people see aging as a passive process, they tend to disengage. They move less, expect less, and gradually surrender control over how they feel and function. Yet research consistently shows that individuals have far more influence over their aging process than they have been taught to believe. Control does not mean denying biology or pretending that time has no effects. It means recognizing that biology responds to behavior and behavior responds to thought. Every day, the mind makes countless small decisions: how much effort to apply, how much attention to give, whether to engage or withdraw. These decisions accumulate. Over time, they shape posture, energy levels, cognitive sharpness, and emotional resilience. Aging, in this sense, becomes a pattern of choices rather than a fixed destiny. The moment people realize they are participants rather than spectators, something shifts internally. The question changes from "what is happening to me" to "what am I doing in response to what is happening?" That shift restores agency. Agency is not just a psychological comfort, it has direct physiological effects. A sense of control is associated with lower stress levels, improved immune function, and better overall health outcomes. When people believe their actions matter, the body behaves as if survival and growth are worth investing in. One of the most powerful hooks in this idea is how subtle the influence of choice can be. Control is not exercised only through major lifestyle changes. It shows up in small, repeatable actions: choosing to walk a little farther, to engage in a conversation more fully, to approach a task with interest rather than obligation. These choices signal to the brain that the individual is still active, still relevant, still evolving. The brain responds by maintaining systems that support movement, learning, and adaptation. There is also a cognitive aspect to control that is often overlooked. How people interpret physical sensations plays a critical role in aging. Fatigue can be seen as a warning to stop or as information to adjust. Slower performance can be interpreted as decline or as an invitation to focus differently. When sensations are interpreted through a lens of helplessness, they lead to withdrawal. When interpreted through a lens of control, they lead to adaptation. That difference alone can determine whether someone becomes more limited or more skilled over time. Another compelling dimension of control is social behavior. People who believe they have influence over their aging are more likely to stay socially engaged. They initiate interactions, contribute ideas, and remain visible in their communities. Social engagement reinforces cognitive complexity and emotional regulation, both of which are critical for healthy aging. Isolation, by contrast, accelerates decline, not because of age itself, but because of disengagement. Perhaps the most underestimated power of control is its cumulative effect. No single choice transforms aging overnight, but repeated choices compound. Small acts of engagement performed daily can produce changes that appear dramatic over years. From the outside, these individuals seem to be aging well or defying age, but from the inside, they are simply responding consistently to the belief that their actions matter. When people stop outsourcing responsibility for aging to time alone, they reclaim authorship of their own experience. The body responds to this authorship with resilience. The mind responds with confidence. Aging becomes less about what is being lost and more about how life is being actively lived. The most important takeaway is not that we can turn back the clock, but that we don't have to be imprisoned by it. Each moment offers us the opportunity to choose how we think, how we pay attention, and how actively we participate in our own lives. By questioning the assumptions we've inherited about aging, we give ourselves permission to live more fully at every stage of life. If we recognize that the mind plays a central role in how we age, we also recognize our own agency. Aging is not something that simply happens to us. It is something we are actively involved in every day through our beliefs, our expectations, and our attention. When we change the way we think about age, we don't just add years to life, we add life to years.